now recognises children in their own right as victims of domestic abuse. But given the high profile of safeguarding and domestic abuse, this session gives us the opportunity to share emerging themes in Sandwell and serves as a reminder that safeguarding is everyone's collective responsibility. I see there's a packed agenda for today's session with some superb keynote speakers, and I'm really sorry that I'm unable to join you for the rest of the session. However, I know that I'll get notes and details and feedback from Lisa and colleagues in relation to how the day has gone, and I hope that you'll have a fantastic session ahead. Each of the presentations is intended to give you an overview of key learning and some of the specific themes. And if you'd like to learn more, there'll be a new training catalogue that's launching in April, and details of which will be available at the end of the event, and also how to book onto those sessions as well. It clearly goes without saying that the topics we are discussing today, they are sensitive. Some of the information will be about Sandwell families that you may know or have worked with. There may be triggers for some people throughout the session. So please do practice self-care. Move away from the screen if you need to, speak to a manager or a colleague as appropriate. It's important that whilst we're contributing to the session and listening to some of the new updates and developments, that we also preserve our well-being as well at the same time. Approximate timings are included in the delegate pack, and if you want or need to take a break and come back, please feel free to do so. As the event is virtual, please ensure it cannot be overheard by any children, young people or vulnerable adults, and as we know, safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. For me, I just want to say once again, I'm sorry that I'm not able to stay for the rest of the session, but I want to make sure that you have a fantastic day. It's a chance for it to share highlights and relevant updates from colleagues as appropriate, and I just want to wish you well for the day ahead. A packed agenda, huge amounts of stuff to cover, some superb keynote speakers, and I really wish you have a wonderful session this morning up until lunchtime. All the very best.
Thank you, Michael, for introducing the event. Just introduce myself because I'll be the person that will trying to keep people to time and moving them along. My name's Lisa Harvey, and I also work for education. I work in the Safeguarding Hub, and I have the good fortune to also chair the Learn and Development subgroup on behalf of the partnership. And some of you may see me popping up delivering various bits of training across the partnership for you. So as Michael said, we have got a very, very packed agenda. We are going to try and keep to time. I know some people are struggling with sound, so hopefully we can get that resolved, or you can get that resolved. But I'm going to hand over to Jane Clark now, who will introduce herself and talk to you about the neglect strategy in Sandwell. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Lisa. I hope everybody can hear me, and can you see me? Yeah, I'm not sure.
We can't see you, Jane.
Right, do you want me to just, it's all right. Can you see me now?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right, thank you, Lisa. My name's Jane Clark. I am the Safeguarding Lead for Sandwell and West Birmingham NHS Trust, but I'm also the chair of the Tackling Neglect subgroup. Sandwell Safeguarding Children Partnership have clearly identified neglect as a key priority of work for us, and as such, early last year, the Tackling Neglect subgroup was set up with a key principle and role and responsibility was to obviously reduce the levels of neglect within Sandwell. And to obviously have robust systems and processes in place for the early identification and a really, ambitious ambition of reducing and, tackling neglect at its earliest juncture. And I think within that, it was key that we listen to young people because we know that, neglect, the impact of this is significant and is long lasting. And in a number of reviews that we've undertaken in Sandwell, and only recently the other week, we realized, we saw that even though neglect wasn't the causal factor of the child death, neglect had been a significant feature historically, and that's not the first, the first instance of that. So within the subgroup, one of the key purposes and objectives was to actually develop a strategy, an overarching strategy. So to set the scene for this, last year in June, the conference was delivered that was with regard to is neglect being neglected. And as you can see on the screen slide there, this is some work that Jade, our business partner, who has developed and worked on the strategy, met with a group of young people, care leavers who'd had, experienced adversity in their life. And these are some of the comments that they were saying. And we know that, 50% of our children on child protection plans, it's due to neglect. And we know that there's core groups of young people that are more vulnerable, those being children with disabilities, those vulnerable to exploitation, whether that be criminal and sexual, where there's cultural difference, and children with living with parents where there's been a tree of vulnerabilities, and also children experiencing high levels of deprivation and poverty. And we know within Sandwell, we're the 12th most deprived local authority out of 317. So as you can appreciate, it is a key focus for our work. The strategy has been supported and presented to the Safeguarding Children Partnership, and this will be circulated to everybody post the conference. The key principles of the strategy is to have an overarching framework to ensure that our practitioners working with children and vulnerable families have a shared understanding of neglect and its impact on children, and also that our children and families receive the right support at the right time to help kind of reduce the impact of neglect. And again, through early recognition, and the way that we're going to achieve that is through our assessment tools and embedding the graded care profile tool across the partnership, and obviously having a consistent and collaborative approach across all partners. So the key, as I say, the protective factors that we know are around parental resilience, obviously social connections, and knowledge of parenting and child development, and obviously having the significant support at those times of need. Within the strategy, I mean, I won't go through this page by page, but just pull out some key themes from this. The overarching objectives are around preparing, so that's raising the awareness across the partnership and the understanding of neglect and its impact. And as I've said previously, to ensure that there's a clear and consistent approach which governs the multi-agency systems and structures to prevent and tackle neglect. And obviously preventing is paramount, and again looking at ways that we prevent that, looking at our referral pathways, and as I've said, making sure we've got kind of well validated assessment tools such as the graded care profile. And obviously in the protect element is to ensure that partners are stronger at identifying and assessing and intervening in cases of neglect. So probably I'll close on that note and let you just you all kind of review the strategy. And just a big thanks from myself to Jade Maynard and Gillian Ming, who have worked tirelessly on pulling the strategy together. It has, and thank you to the subgroup, and obviously partners have contributed to this and made comments. So this is the final version. I'm sure Jade is absolutely pleased that it's been signed off. So that's all from me, unless anyone has any questions. And I think I've stuck to time. Lisa, I'll hand back to you.
I think you have, Jane. Well done. Brilliant. Thank you very much. If anybody has got any questions for Jane, if you want to pop those in the chat, I'm sure she'll answer those for you if you have got any queries for her. So thank you. From Jane over to Gillian Ming, who's the Safeguarding Partnership Business Manager. So over to you, Gillian, who will introduce herself. I think Gillian may be struggling to get herself off mute.
Yeah, well, hi everyone. At the moment, I am actually struggling to find my slides, so just bear with me a second. Karina, do you want to share my slides for me, please? I do apologise about this.
Yeah, we'll bring them up for you, Gillian.
Hold on, let me just try again. Just try again. Right, lovely, thank you. Thank you. Right, apologies for that. I think I've managed to sort of take back a few minutes from which Jane has sort of kindly given me in terms of keeping this time in. Right, welcome everyone. My name's Gillian Ming and I'm the business manager for the Safeguarding Children's Partnership here in Sandwell. Just a little bit of a refresh, just to say that this is the third Safeguarding Today event that we've had, and I think the first one started in January 2021, where we gave an overview in terms of the Safeguarding Partnership and focused very much on the priorities of the partnership as well. We then went on. The second one was very much around emotional mental health and well-being, and this is the third Safeguarding Today event. Now, in terms of looking at the landscape from a safeguarding perspective, much of what we actually do, the systems and processes that we all work to, is very much influenced and have arisen from some form of incident that maybe have happened. And this is not just about children's. This is also about vulnerable adults, and and also around sort of domestic abuse for domestic homicide reviews as well. So a lot of reviews that are done is very much as a result of an incident that has happened, that is perhaps very much in the public domain, very much in terms of learning lessons to learn, and all of that work really shapes and influences the whole safeguarding landscape in terms of how we work and how we actually engage with children and families and those that are most vulnerable in society. If you can move me on to the next slide, please, Karina. In terms of, from a safeguarding children's perspective, there is always a duty to sort of notify Ofsted, DFE and the national panel where a child, where we know or suspect that a child has died or has been, where a child has been harmed and abuse or neglect is known or suspected. Okay, and within all of that, it's very important for us to then ensure, from a national perspective, that children's ministers is very much engaged. From an Ofsted perspective, in terms of regulating purposes, again, very much informed, and holding safeguarding partnerships to account in terms of how we really monitor and drive forward changes from incidents that have happened pertaining to children. We've got the National Safeguarding Practice Panel, and they actually monitor and oversee a lot of most of the incidents that happen from a child safeguarding practice perspective. If you move me on to the next slide, Karina, please. So if I look at, just a slight a glimpse in terms of, from a national perspective, in 2020, we're just looking, at the height of COVID. If we just look at sort of some of the numbers that in terms of that was notified to the panel, Ofsted and DFE during 2020. So there was 482 serious incidents notified to the panel relating to 514 children. Again, that will be multiple siblings. 35% were under ones, 30% were between 5 and 18. Now, if we look at what we know and what research has told us, we do tend to find, higher numbers of harm to children under 5s, and then in the older category, 5 to 17. From that figure, 206 were fatal incidents, 30% SUDI, which is sudden unexpected death in infants, and 20% were suspected suicide. Of course, you can have a copy of the slides. 267 serious harm incidents, and 22% were non-accidental injuries. Neglect featured in 35% of all of those incidents, and domestic abuse was a background factor in 40%. Parental mental health featured in 146 incidents, that was 78% relating to mothers. In 16% of the incident, the child also experienced mental health. There was also a high proportion of incidents reported to the panel relating to Black and ethnic minority groups of children as well. In 51 incidents involving risk-taking behaviour, 75% had gang-related activities, county line background, exploitation as a cause or a primary cause of serious harm. So again, you know, these are the national figures. Let's just take a glimpse now. What does this look like for Sandwell? How does this translate to Sandwell? If you could move me on to the next slide, please, Karina. Thank you. Right, okay. So during that same period, 1st of January to the 31st of December 2020, there were 9 serious incidents notified to the panel. Now, had I been sharing the slides myself, you would also seen that the next bit of that would have been 5 of those 9s actually contributed to the national figures that we've seen. 4 didn't actually hit the criteria. Okay, so I've got to make that perfectly clear. And in the slides that I do share, it will actually, that will be corrected on that slide. 44% of children were under 1, and 22% was between that 15 to 18. So again, we can see higher numbers in perhaps sort of those under 5s, or well, under 1s in this case. 6 were fatal incidents. 67% were SUDI, so we've got high numbers of SUDI, you know, and 33% suspected suicide. 3 serious harm incidents, and 22% were related to non-accidental injuries. Neglect featured in 33% of all incidents, and I think that's quite similar to sort of it's on par with the national trend. But if you look at the next one down, domestic abuse background was domestic abuse was a background in 67% of those incidents, and that is high, you know. So when we're looking at some of our domestic homicide reviews, you know, and also when we're looking at our practice, and I'm going to start this quite early, that early intervention is critical. Okay, parental mental health featured in 6 incidents. Again, that was 100% relating to mothers. In 22% of children had also experienced some form of emotional mental health. The trend in 2020, from the 5 children that I mentioned at the top, we actually undertook 4 local safeguarding practice reviews. So for 2 children, we actually did a combined local safeguarding practice review because of the similarities and also the period of time as well. Invisible men was actually a feature in all 4 local serious case safeguarding practice reviews that were undertaken. And what was very evident was that father's role, voice, presence was less evident in work. And what we were actually seeing was mothers being held to account for most of the child rearing practices. And again, you know, we'll look at, you know, what that actually means as we move on to the next slide. Corinne, if you can move me on to the next slide, please. Okay, so non-accidental injuries in under 1s, and this is actually taken from the national review, because what we recognise is that the same themes, the same findings were very evident for us at a local level. And also, just to add to that, in the national review, which was the myths about invisible men, Sandwell actually contributed. We were one of the 20 or 30 local authority areas that actually contributed to that review. The key findings, very similar to what we found in Sandwell, was substance misuse was often a feature, and actually increased levels of stress, anxiety, sleeplessness, and frustration. Again, coexistence with domestic abuse. And I think we've seen these patterns over a number of years, and I think we're beginning to learn more and also recognise more, that coexistence, or what was known as the vulnerability, the trio of vulnerabilities. And again, we're actually still seeing these themes. Again, in the work that the national panel did, there was, quite a feature of mental health, and again, this was seen frequently in men. Now, if we go back to the slide before, what I actually said was that for Sandwell, we did see mental health, but actually it was all mums. Did we ever ask the question? Do we know what that actually looked like for fathers? Would be sort of my challenge. Okay. Next slide, please. Again, if you want to know more, I have put a link there in terms of the webinar that the national panel did, that really looks at, the myths about invisible men, and much more in terms of the field work and that research that was done. So what did the national review, what did they actually think or surmise in terms of what does it mean for practice, and equally what does it mean for us in Sandwell? Again, the findings from our 4 CSPRs are very similar, along the same themes as that for the national review. So again, findings: engaging, assessing work with men is often, it's definitely not easy, and I don't think we can actually sort of suggest anything other. What we need to do is ensure that we're actually looking at practice against policies and procedures. We're looking at findings from research. We're exploring new ways to engage and work. Not just with fathers, but with families. From a national perspective, they've actually come up with a 4-tier model that interlinks and challenges the safeguarding system to actually think and do things differently. And within the national review, they've talked about, this 4-tier model for engaging with fathers and protecting babies. But actually, the 4-tier model, it's a really good model, and it can apply to all systems and processes. And we'll look at that in a moment. Karina, on to the next slide, please. So in terms of some of the themes, the real themes, again, from a national panel perspective, but also what we've seen at a local level, understanding what a child's daily life is like, working with families where their engagement is reluctant and sporadic. What do we need to do differently? That critical thinking and challenge. How do we actually do that? What strategies, what processes, what models? How do we really try and do things differently? Responding to changing risks and needs. How do we actually, identify, actually, there's an escalating risk here. We need to step this up. Again, it's coming back down. Again, how do we actually provide, support that wraps around the needs of children and families? Sharing information in a timely way in every single, former serious case reviews, and now moving forward to child safeguarding practice reviews, domestic homicide reviews, safeguarding adult reviews. We get the same kind of messages around information sharing in a timely and appropriate way and manner. And I think, we really need to think about what does that actually mean. Organisational leadership and culture. Do we have that commitment right from the very top? And actually, are we doing those communication channels? Are we actually consulting with each other right at the front line, and actually and also keeping that open right at the top in terms of the strategic lead? Where are we actually seeing those communication routes? How effective are they? Next slide, please, Karina. So I'm going to look at that 4-tier model that they talked about. Service design. What is the culture and context in Sandwell? What processes and tools do we actually use? And how, what does our service offer really look like for children, families, and those that are most vulnerable? Supporting best practice. How does a role of supervisors, supervision, you know, leadership, heads of service, team managers, your line managers. How do they actually support, you know, and influence and really challenge your thinking and whet your appetite in terms of trying to do things differently to keep children and adults and, you know, those that are most vulnerable safe? And it really is about looking at the whole systems approach to sort of make improvements, strengthen our practices that we've got. You know, engaging and assessing not men only, but, you know, the whole family, including men. I will say, including men. You know, developing strategies to engage and work differently, so we can actually see a greater impact. And again, exploring ideas, race, culture, ethnicity, personal histories, background. Absolutely important to understand, you know, a child's lived experiences, a child's journey. Really important. So let's look at all of this from a Sandwell perspective. Next slide, please, Karina. Right, okay. So what does this all mean from us from a local perspective and for local practice? The finding from our four local child safeguarding practice reviews from incidents in 2020, you know, looking at what we've actually learned. Looking at what we've actually learned, looking also at some of the other wider work that we've been doing in terms of multi-agency case file audits, looking at some of the feedback that we're getting from our independent scrutineer, who I believe is probably on next. And also we've had a challenge from the chief exec from the Children's Trust in terms of, you know, in terms of the effectiveness of the whole system approach from early help through to statutory social work. You know, how effective is that working and how effective are those systems? And also in terms of the learning, we're actually learning the same things. What are we actually doing differently? Because if we keep doing the same things for the same issues, we're only going to ever end up with the same outcomes. Okay, so in terms of that service design, the Sandwell culture, what does that actually mean? Is it the same for us all? Because actually what we do need to do is have a same language, this, you know, a systems of tools, processes that we all know, recognise and use consistently to keep children safe. Communicate. You know, these are the things that we really need to do. We need to continue to do them. We need to join up our work, join up our thinking, and make sure that you know, the systems and processes that we have got in place are equally applied to all children, all families, and actually they land well. So and how do we know they land well? We need to communicate. We need to be asking those questions. So again, that communication route is absolutely critical. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we started to do in Sandwell, we started to look at, again, through the early help processes, and at the moment there's a lot of work going on in terms of the early help world, and actually really trying to improve our understanding of early help and the early help offer in Sandwell. And in starting to do that, we're trying to standardise the language that we're using. We're also trying to make sure that in terms of the windscreen and the model that we're using for children, to safeguard children, is common. It's common practice, and no matter where you are in Sandwell, you know, if we say multi-agency early help, we know what that refers to. If we say statutory social work, we know what that refers to. We haven't put lines in between the levels because actually, you know, it needs to flow. It doesn't stop and then start. We need to have that. It needs to be a continuing process to keep children and families safe, and it's something that we all own. We all own. We're all committed to, and you know, in terms of all of the reviews that we've done, what we can see in Sandwell is dedicated, committed, strength. You know, that drive, enthusiasm to do the very, very best that we can do for Sandwell's population in keeping children, families and those that are vulnerable safe. Again, what we really need to do is work together, really join that up. So from a safeguarding partnership perspective, I think what we now need to do is make sure that we're consulting, we're actually reaching out to right to the front line, we're, you know, asking those right questions, and not just asking the questions, but actually hearing the answers and considering those answers in terms of shaping, influence and driving improvements to a place where actually what we're doing is getting better outcomes for children and families. So the next slide for me, I'm going to start to sort of try and look at some of those questions around how can we actually do some of that. I think now my slide is going to, well, I think now Karina's going to take over. Okay, let me try and look at this from, right, okay. So so early help. If people can, Karina, have you asked people to use their phones and do the Mentimeter? Or do I need to do that?
First, slide, Gillian, and I think Lucy's going to put the code into the chat as well for us.
Right, okay, right, okay. So I'll give people a few minutes to do that. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, lovely. If people can sort of put the Mentimeter, go onto the log into the Mentimeter on your scroll bar and use the code, please. Okay, so if people can just start answering those, just this first question, what does early help, what does it actually mean to you?
Gillian, can you see some of those responses coming up now?
I can,
Wonderful.
absolutely brilliant. Ah, brilliant. Wonderful, thank you. Giving them a couple of minutes. Wonderful. See, I'm looking at these responses and actually, you know, in terms of what early help means, I think we're more or less I think we're spot on. You know, recognising those signs as early as possible and actually not just recognising the signs, but doing something about it as well. You know, recognising the child in the context and, you know, of the family. Engaging with you know, with families, engaging with children, not imposing on them, but actually engaging with them, doing things differently. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Okay, if we can move on to the next question then, Karina, please. Thank you very much. I think we've got a few more. Oh, Karina, are you still sharing? Because I can't see the next slide.
Sharing to move over to the next screen because I don't know.
Okay, right, at the moment, you know, we have an early help assessment, we've got a MARF, and we're actually looking at sort of, you know, how, oh, right, oh, I think the question's already there. Right, early help assessment as you know, a single form, a MARF, separate with a MARF, or do we want something completely different? For example, a call centre. Then actually you ring in with your referrals and you talk through, you know, your concerns, and it generates or populates that information. Again, what I'm not saying is that's what we're looking at, but I think what we need to do is look at our options. Okay. One referral form. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Karina. Thank you. I think we'll move on to the next one. Thank you very much. Next question. Right. You know, what we're actually seeing is a real fluctuation in terms of gaining consent on referral forms. And, you know, we've fluctuated from, I don't know, something like 50% of no referrals to 86% of referrals with no consent. What we'd really need to unpick is, what are the barriers to gaining consent? What are the barriers? These are areas that we're actually seeing, time and time again, referrals coming in with no consent, and actually that in itself, acts as a delay. Okay, lovely. Lovely. I'm going to ask this more or less the same question in terms of information sharing, because again, information sharing, as I've said, we actually see more or less, I'd probably guess around 90% of all reviews, whether that's safeguarding adults reviews, domestic homicide reviews, or child safeguarding practice reviews, information sharing is the next question we'll be asking about, information sharing. Corinne, if you can move on to the next slide, just mindful of time. So again, challenges for information sharing. What are the issues? What are the barriers? Getting it wrong. What about if you're right? Doesn't that override that? Okay, brilliant. Oh, this is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Communication. Thank you. Karina, okay, thank you. I think there's one more, is there? 3 more in terms of, right, okay. In terms of the threshold that I've just shown, where we talked, I think there were 3 areas really. It was early help, multi-agency early help, and statutory social work. First, not clear. Right, would people think those language as in terms of easy to understand, standardized language, is that clear or not clear? In trying to in really looking at thresholds, there's something about keeping the language simple, keep making sure that we understand, and it can be easily applied. Thank you, Karina. If you just move me back on to just that last, I think I've got 1 slide left. Back to my presentation. Thank you all for that. I think that what we'll actually do from there is, I think the next slide is absolutely is really sort of look at that information and include that in any work that's taking forward. However, the next, you know, the next part of work is very much around making sure that we consistently reach frontline practitioners and have those conversations, you know, build in, you know, consultation groups with frontline practitioners. So actually, you know, when we are thinking about the threshold, when we are thinking about early help, when we are thinking about systems and processes, actually, you know, we've got a group of frontline practitioners that we can consult with and do consult with. So I think that, you know, my next question then really is about very much in terms of, if you would like to be a part of a consultation group, and there is lots of different themes that we're covering in terms of shaping, influencing, you know, the systems and processes that we have in Sandwell to keep children and young people safe within the systems, then if you can please just send us an email into the business unit, and actually we will then ensure that when we are doing work and we are reviewing, and we do always want the voice of the front line, we can actually reach out to yourselves. It's really important that we develop and create that communication route. So we're not doing to the front line, but actually we're doing with the front line. Only in that way can we actually shape and influence and really improve the safeguarding landscape in Sandwell. And again, what I'm not going to say is that we're not doing the best that we are doing, but actually what we can do is do more, and actually we can actually shift in terms of, you know, the culture, the community makes a shift. We need to actually shift with it also. Yeah. Right, so I think that actually now brings me to the end of my presentation in terms of next steps. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over, I think, back to Lisa.
Thank you, Gillian. I think that was very good to get some oversight of people's views. There are a number of queries and observations within the chat, so perhaps if you could pick those up and answer those individuals there, that would be really helpful. And I think there's some things in there also that potentially, you know, we may want to take back to various you know, departments, maybe the trust, to address those. So are you happy to pick those up, Gillian?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll pick them up.
Okay, thank you very much. But thank you for that, Gillian. And all keeping to time, which is brilliant. So I'm going to hand over to Liz Murphy, who's our independent scrutineer. She will introduce herself and go through her current activity. So over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. Three challenges there. One following Gillian, two following something that's interactive, and then setting me the challenge to keep to time. I've been invited to talk to you about a piece of work that I'm doing about domestic abuse screening. But if we just go to the next slide, I'll just say a little bit about the role of the independent scrutineer. It's not a title that I've given myself. It's a title that's in working together, and every safeguarding partnership is required to have an element of independent scrutiny. And the purpose of the role is as that first bullet point says, it's to be a constructive and critical friend, and to work out how things are working for children and families, for practitioners. So it's great to see that your views and as practitioners and managers are being sought in that Mentimeter, and then how the safeguarding partners, so those 4 statutory partners who've got the leadership responsibility in terms of the safeguarding arrangements, how well they are providing that leadership. And its purpose, so it's absolutely not in any form of inspection territory or intended to be critical. It's all about that what we all know in terms of our practice, that when we reflect and take the opportunity to stop, think and learn, that we get better, and it can drive continuous improvement. So if we go to the next slide, I was asked to do a piece of scrutiny work around domestic abuse screening, and I will say a little bit about what that is, just in case there's people in the room who aren't sure. So I will cover that. The rationale for being asked to look at the domestic abuse screening arrangements was because of what we know about the impact of exposure to domestic abuse on outcomes for children, and that's both in terms of being exposed to domestic abuse, but also that it can be often accompanied by other forms of adversity, and then that combination then increases vulnerability for children, and often in terms of compromised parenting. There were some changes, and some of you will be more cited on these than others maybe. There were some changes in the police recording system across West Midlands Police that resulted in some changes to the way information was shared about incidents of domestic abuse involving children, and there was some concerns about some of the delay that was causing, so that was another factor. And then when I met with those who are most involved with the domestic abuse screening, so those who do the doing, and because I wanted to hear from their perspective what they saw as what was working well and what were some of the challenges, and what hearing their views, we decided it was really important to explore how support is coordinated to victims and children below level 4, so below the statutory social work threshold, be that whether that's section 17 child in need, or whether that's the child protection level of need. And that was because those who are most involved talk about seeing repeat cases, or children who were previously, some of them have been doing it for quite a while, children who, the adults now, who are coming through as young perpetrators, were previously children exposed to domestic abuse in their own childhood experiences. So we will go to the next slide, but just before I go through the content here, I'm just going to say the domestic abuse screening is where the police share information with initially Sandwell Children's Trust. They also, and I know Lisa's going to follow me to talk a little bit about Operation Encompass, so information is also shared with the local authority around Operation Encompass, which is a linked primarily with education, but I'm talking primarily now about the domestic abuse screening. So information is shared with the Children's Trust, and there is then a raft of activity that takes place in the MASH, with a range of partners being given that information to check what they know about each of the respective children and adults, and then they come together later in the day to identify what level of need they have assessed the information from the police to be across the threshold document. So that's what domestic abuse screening is. So as I said, I met with those involved at the outset. I've observed the children's social care screening. So in the morning, when that information comes through from the police, a social work team manager looks through all of that information and identifies the cases, the children that clearly meet the level 4 threshold, and they then are processed through in terms of either some of them for strategy discussions, or some of them for single assessments, and I mean a single assessment led by a social worker, but obviously a multi-agency assessment. I then observed that domestic abuse triage meeting, which takes place in the afternoon. So that is a meeting. The meeting I observed involved police, Black Country Women's Aid, and early help worker from within the MASH, as well as health and education, and they were representatives in terms of being able to share information from education providers and health providers. I selected 8 cases for follow-up, so that was about 20%. So that tells you that we looked at there was about 40 cases on the day. And some of those will be of multiple children within families, and I selected those cases because to test out what partners had said to me, or those who are involved, about what support is provided to children and families. We designed a survey that was sent then to 26 frontline staff and they were people who received the information out of the domestic abuse triage meeting. So, and it was to follow up what actions they had taken as a result of receiving that information. You'll see to date there's been six responses. I've had some one-to-one meetings, and my task next week is to pull this together into a report. If we go to the next slide, please. So I have clearly had a focus in terms of the process itself. But for the purposes of today's session, what I wanted to share with you was the practice messages that struck me. And I know some of these will fit later with some of the other speakers following me in terms of okay, I'll come back at the end to the questions in the chat if that's okay, but it's a helpful question, Sharon. So the first thing, and some of these you will know, but I just want to reinforce what I saw. So the repeated exposure and harm. Very few cases. And this was the first incident of domestic abuse that had been reported to the police, and there'll be, we know how many, the significant number, over 30, 35, around 35 incidents of domestic abuse take place before somebody will, on average, before somebody contacts the police. So two thoughts really, that we know that there's repeated exposure, but we also know out there are victims who have not yet told their story. So because some a very small number had come forward, and I can remember one case where it was a female victim, and she described for the first time 9 years of systematic domestic abuse. The majority do not meet the statutory threshold, the level 4 threshold. And what I would say is, because you might be thinking, well, is that because the threshold is being applied wrong? What I would say is, for the cases that I saw on the day I observed, I saw the statutory threshold being applied appropriately. Just to give you an illustration of the volume that comes through and what doesn't go through to level 4, and remember, we've got potentially these, so the volume that's not going through to social work assessment, and I would say appropriately, and then we've got what's happening to those children that aren't then, and I guess that's the ultimate message out of this piece of work. So between July and September 21, there was 1,370 domestic abuse contacts. If anyone feels brave enough, feel free to put any percentage, the percentage of those that you think that went on to be a referral. If not, just hold that thought in your head, what percentage you might think of that 1,370. And the answer is 6%. So 83 of those 1,370 contacts went on to be a referral. That doesn't mean they all progress to be an assessment. So I'm just giving you that to get to so you've got a flavour about potentially the volume of children that are out there needing support. The perpetrators, so various relationships to the children, and it's that the definition of domestic abuse is about, is broad. We can tend to think about it in terms of as intimate relationships, in terms of adults, but there was, on the day that I was there was fathers, there was partners, there was women, there was mothers who were the perpetrators, there was children over the age of 16 in their own relationships, and then there was some adult siblings of children who didn't live in the family home, and some of those perpetrators were also open to adult focused services, so adult mental health or probation. Can I just check, can people hear me? Somebody's put network in the chat.
Yes, I can hear you, Liz.
Hear you, Liz.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you. So okay, the word network threw me. I thought it might have been my Wi-Fi. So some of the perpetrators are open cases to probation. Some of them are open cases to adult mental health because of factors that impact on their domestic abuse, and some of them were subject to court orders in terms of so-called civil court orders preventing them contacting the victim. So my message there is think holistically about the people who could be harming and or creating harm in family circumstances. The police domestic abuse risk assessment level. So some of you will know that police will grade a domestic abuse incident standard, medium, or high risk. And a lot of the incidences were graded standard or medium. There were some high. There could be a temptation to use that as a proxy measure to evaluate what are the child's needs. And what I'd say is they are different. So the evidence base for the domestic abuse risk assessment level is about the risk of serious harm to the adult victim, which is different to the impact of the child's repeated exposure to domestic abuse. So think holistically in terms of when you don't just have that think about, well, this is a medium risk or this is a standard risk. Think what's likely to be the child's lived experience, and then contact what was there was beginning to be a pattern just on that one day, and those involved in this, daily fed this back, that contact and the handover for contact creates the opportunity for somebody to perpetrate domestic abuse. And I will come back to that. What does that mean that you can do? So practice messages. If we carry on to the next page. So where the victim, the adult victim, was either being coerced or more likely due to previous trauma, including their own childhood trauma, as we're unable to recognise their victimization, or we're minimizing what had happened, that was a barrier to them being able to access services, and therefore a barrier for their children to be able to access the specialist services that do exist out there. And so there was some of the cases that were repeat cases where there was support being provided to the adult victim and to the children, or that the adult victim would be able to support their child by virtue of the support they were receiving. But there was a bigger proportion where the adult victim wasn't engaged in support services for those reasons that I've just talked about. And what I'd want to say is that it's not a one-off conversation about seeking support or about what's happening. We know that this is domestic abuse is a pattern. It's not a one-off incident, and the triage arrangements focus on the most recent incident, and there's maybe a conversation with somebody about, do they want help, and the answer is yes or no. All of you who are here today, who may get to learn about the domestic abuse incident through the information sharing arrangements, have a really important role to play in terms of following up and asking questions. So it's that drip approach to being able to create the opportunities both for somebody to share new information, but also to reflect on whether they are able or ready to be able to engage in support services. And then that whole family approach. So I'm sure for those of you who've been to these sessions before, you've heard that there's a continuous practice challenge, not just in Sandwell, nationally, about in safeguarding, about how we engage with fathers and men. And I've seen that in the cases of domestic abuse, and the question really is, how are perpetrators, who are more likely to be men, but not exclusively, both challenged and supported to consider the impact of their behaviour. And we know, in terms of there are some gaps currently in services where perpetrators can be referred to be to receive specialist intervention to support them in terms of that both challenge and change in their behaviour. But that, you know, in terms of whilst that bigger issue in terms of the service provision is resolved, you know, you work with families, so thinking back to that contact point, you know, you can have a conversation with both parents about how is contact going to work, and you know, one of the things that struck me was that we need to make it really unacceptable for men and fathers who are using contact to create harm to both their ex-partner, but also expose their children to domestic abuse, and enabling them to reflect on what that might mean for their children is something we can do currently. Okay, the next slide then, and I've just got 3 more to go, so time should work out okay. So the domestic abuse needs assessment, because of the Domestic Abuse Act, I've had sight of a very comprehensive domestic abuse needs assessment that's been completed in Sandwell, and I don't do it justice in terms of these 3 bullet points, but I've picked out the 3 that I think are most relevant to the audience today. So the first one is a range of professionals have contributed to the assessment, and they have self-identified that they can support disclosure through greater professional curiosity. They have asked for further training both on the referral pathways and the specialist offer, and also the talking through the value of the specialist offer with victims or survivors. Now, so that final second part of that second bullet point reflects my observation about what I saw in terms of that the adult victims aren't necessarily ready to engage, but having that conversation with somebody they know, you know, somebody phoning the day after triage is different than talking to somebody they already know. And then the final point is that a holistic family support model is needed, and goes back to my, you know, earlier comments about working with men. It's not a realistic, there will be for some victims, it's absolutely the right thing for the relationship to end, and that's the thing that will secure their safety and their children's safety. But for others, that isn't a realistic approach, and we need to work with, in the same way we do work with other risk factors, with a whole family approach, to create the change and the safety plans that will promote increased, will reduce the exposure of children to domestic abuse. Now, Lisa, if we go to the next slide, I know Lisa's going to do a short input after me about Operation Encompass. What I've been researching, because there is an interface between what happens in Sandwell around Operation Encompass and the domestic abuse screening arrangements. But so I've been doing some research on the Operation Encompass website, and what I'd say is it's a really great resource, particularly for schools. There is a helpline for schools, a daily helpline that you can access, but I should also say that there is a comprehensive offer to schools via Black Country Women's Aid as well. So for what struck me, and I was the challenge that from the Operation Encompass website, it really connected with me. So we have the language in, you know, since Victoria Climbier's tragic murder, we have the phrase safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, and that is true. But the Operation Encompass bring the challenge to say, does that allow us, when we, you know, we're very busy, and, you know, competing demands, does that allow us to think somebody else will act? And potentially that could be what is happening with the domestic abuse triage arrangements. And they propose a revised mantra that safeguarding is my responsibility, and that includes children living with domestic abuse. And that's it's only changing one word, but it really shifts the emphasis. And so my final slide then What does this mean? So if you remember, I started by saying that the role of the independent scrutineer was to promote reflection, to drive continuous improvement. So I've got 3 reflective questions for you as practitioners or managers. What else can you do to promote the disclosure for the domestic abuse that is, you know, unseen, untold, unknown? What else can you do? Do you know about all the available services in the borough in terms of for children, for victims and for perpetrators? And how can you, through ongoing conversations, and I recognise there's a confidence in that, professional confidence and skill, but how can you have those ongoing conversations to support those victims to engage in the support that is available? And then for the safeguarding partners, there's a question I'm sure you've seen emerging about what is the early intervention model for children and families where domestic abuse is a feature, and then something about the reviewing of the way the domestic abuse screening is happening, because it's back to that slide about Operation Encompass, that it may well be there's a sense that it's delivering support when actually I think it's providing information sharing, but we need to think about what's the follow-up, and hence the focus of the domestic abuse, hence the focus of the scrutiny exercise. So that brings me to the end of the slides, and I can see Lucy's put a comment in the chat to say that some of the questions will be answered during the break. Do I hand back to you, Lisa, now?
Yes, please, Liz. Thank you very much. And I think that's give a real good sort of context around what's going on with the DAS process, and that we know it does need looking at, and some recommendations and some tweaks. There are a number of questions in amongst all that chat for you, so if you could pick those up for us while we carry on, that'd be great, Liz. Is that okay? Thank you very much. So Liz has sort of introduced what she's been doing as part of the review, and I'm just going to talk to you about Operation Encompass for a few minutes before we have a comfort break. I understand, Holly, you're going to share the presentation, or did you want me to?
Just bring it up now, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks. So Operation Encompass is something that my team coordinate from the Safeguarding Hub. So it's something that comes from the Safeguarding Hub, and it's my team that send that out to schools. So if you can just move to the next slide, please. So what is Operation Encompass? It is a police and education early intervention safeguarding partnership. And what happens is the police will share their agenda with us at the start of the day, and tell us what can and can't go off really to schools. It aims to ensure that schools are notified in a timely manner of any domestic abuse, and the aim is to get it in place for support in place for children who are vulnerable in these households. So the concept of it is schools will receive that notification hopefully before the children start school at the start of the morning, and it's the incidents that have occurred either over the weekend or the evening or day before, and we get it the next 9 times out of 10 the next working day. Now, when it first started, we did get those notifications out to school by the start of the day, so you could see, the schools could see if somebody was coming in and they seemed upset, or they might not have been in correct uniform, or they may have been a little less cooperative than they usually are. And what we didn't, what we was aiming to do is that schools then would maybe have a little understanding of why those children may be like that. And I'm going to talk to you about the challenges that we've got at the moment. So we send those to school by our secure local authority transfer of information to schools. So that's a thing called Move It. And it will usually be the day after the incident, or like I said, if it's a weekend, it's the Monday after that. Sometimes those notifications may be delayed, and it may be, or it may look like they're delayed. So, for example, a school may get something that's dated from a month ago, and it may be that now the victim feels able to go and disclose or report it to the police, but they say this is the incident happened on, I don't know, 31st of December, but I didn't feel I could report it until February, so that's why there may be some historical dates on there. Can we have the next slide, please? So, as I said, we have got some current challenges, and Liz did briefly mention some of those. So the police had a change in their system. I think it was around April last year. At first, it was really, really challenging. Things are improving somewhat, but we still have some challenges within that. So it used to come into our service around 6:30 in the morning. Now, dependent on you know, what the challenges are with the agenda. So some days it may not come in till 9:45. We have known it coming at 10:15, and also that it that information may be missing from that, and that causes time for my team to try and gather that information, that data, and get it across accurately to you. So, for example, on a Monday we have 2 agendas. And the second agenda, we do have a lot of where it's got the victim and the alleged offender, and then it says children mentioned, but we don't know who those children are. So we have to do searches on addresses. You know, it may be that the incident occurred at, you know, it might have been out in public. So again, it's more of a challenge finding what address these children may be living at. So that all causes the delays. And we are aware that, you know, sometimes it's dinner time or early afternoon before you're getting those notifications coming through. And we are trying to work with that. Schools do only receive the names of the child and the date of the incident. And the reasons for that is by the time we've prepared all that to come off to you, nothing has been screened. So sometimes we haven't had, there's a lack of clarity in the information about, you know, is that the offender, is that the victim? I know some police forces have been sending off information about the incident itself. Obviously, we don't do that because we're sending it to the schools, and sometimes there's very, very sensitive information in there that would be perhaps not appropriate to share. And then we also have, so schools may have noticed that they may get 3 or 4 object reference numbers on one notification, and that means that there's 4 or 5 things for that family on our agenda, and it could be allegations and counter allegations. So, you know, the carers can be victims as well as offenders. And we do have a massive volume of domestic abuse incidents in Sandwell. I'm going to share some data in a moment just to give you a little bit of context for that. So it can be extremely challenging for the sheer volume. So, for example, this Monday, the first agenda had 38 incidents on it. That's 38, you know, people who may be, you know, people who may be connected to those 38 incidents, but some families could have 5, 6, 7 children in them, and then we've got to try and identify what schools they go to and complete the DA notification. So that is one of the challenges that we do have with the operation Encompass. Yeah, can we just move on, please? So as Liz has just said, the DASN operation Encompass is under review. So Liz is going to make, you know, do that report, make some recommendations, but also my team and management are looking at, you know, if we can do things differently, if we can, you know, if there's a way that we can speed up the process, you know, if more information can be shared or not. So that is work that's going on in the background. And I think just to answer Lynn's question, yes, it definitely is a challenge to identify the older children's educational establishment. I agree, they do need that level of support too. But again, sometimes we struggle to identify who that is, especially during lockdown when we was, it's not put onto our system when they're 16 plus education. And then we might contact Connections and they say they was due to go to this college, and then we ring that college up and say no, they never started here. So yeah, it is a real challenge, that is. As I've already said, the DAS process is quite labour intensive as we deal with a significant number of incidents. It's recognised that OE is not as timely as it was when it first came into operation for the challenges that I've just said. And we do acknowledge that schools are anxious and concerned that information is limited on the OE notifications. But again, those are for the reasons we've just said. And then that some police forces share more information about incidents. So just to reassure you, we are looking at that and seeing what we can do to change that. Next slide, please. I'm just thinking everybody else kept to time and on time now. Okay, so this is just to give you a little bit of context around the number of Operation Encompass children that we're dealing with. So the incidents are, you know, what comes in on the agenda, like I say, 38, but that could be 80 children, could be 100 children. So these statistics here are individual children, but no, there could be more than one incident for some children. So you know, we can look at some data picking that out, but it could be multiple incidents for those children that are identified in this. So they're not all necessarily different children. So you can see that when we first started, it was November 2018, but I've took the data from the 1st of September 18, and you can see that the domestic abuse incidents have certainly increased when we had our period of lockdown by nearly 1,000 children. You can see how we've increased the triage now, so more cases are being triaged and looked at than under previous systems. So hopefully that offers a little bit of reassurance to you. Thank you, Holly. So the domestic abuse process, which Liz has already spoken about, if you can just click through this, I think it's one of those ones where they jump in. I didn't know how to take it off. So as I said, the agenda comes in, they will look at what's already open cases, you know, and look at what needs to be screened, as Liz said. So I don't want to go through all that. However, when the agenda first comes in, the police will look at what can and can't go off to schools, and then that will be sent to us to send off before Sandwell Children's Trust or anybody has had a chance to have a look at it. The cases that we usually don't send off is if they're MARAC requests, because you will have already had a note, schools will already had a notification for that information, and if it's things like you know, a Clare's Law request. Everything else tends to go off. There may be one or two that, you know, that may not, but you tend to get all of the others. We go into that triage. Next slide, please. We do go into that triage and share lateral information from schools, and we will bring actions back to schools, as do other agencies. They may take those actions back if they're determined that it hasn't met level 4. So it could be an action for Black Country Women's Aid, it might be an action for school, it might be an action for the Children's Centre, or, you know, the targeted support. Next slide, please, Holly. Okay, just click through those. So we do have a voice within that screening process. We do we do talk about duplicate, you know, like multiple incidents and what that may mean, and we do consider that as part of the screening. Okay, next slide, please, Holly. So what we do ask of education providers is to monitor the children. We're not asking, we don't want them to go and speak to the child directly about the incident, because the information that is missing from the police agenda sometimes, it isn't clear if the child was present or not present, so they may not even know that an incident has occurred, and we don't want them, you know, mentioned to them in case they don't know, and, you know, it's going to cause them some more distress. We don't share who the victim or the offender is at this moment in time, so you may be approaching the wrong person if you automatically just approach them. Or the other thing we don't ask is ring up the family and ask if everything's okay following the domestic abuse incident, because it could be that, say, mom's the victim, she answers the phone, but you know, if she's got a partner who's controlling, she may have that on loudspeaker, and he may not actually know that she's reported it to the police, and it could put that victim at further risk. We also ask that you don't routinely just refer it in because you've had a domestic abuse incident. We only ask that those things are referred in if you've got additional information that looks like a threshold's been met for statutory intervention. So that's what we ask and don't ask. Okay, next slide, please, Holly. There is a range of support for the children, and we, like I say, we may ask you as part of the screening. So nurture, support, mentoring, play therapy. We've got Black Country Women's Aid, Our Futures, and I know Carol and Cheryl are coming along to talk about that after the break. Counselling, we've got BEAM, and then talk about toxic. So there are a number of support mechanisms that could be put in place for children following the domestic abuse screening. Next slide, please, Holly. And then this is all the support for parents. So you have got Black Country Women's Aid, and they do offer a range of programmes. They're the commission service for Samwell. There is also the Sandwell Families Together programme for that low-level domestic abuse prevent programme, to look at that, working with both parents, but both parents have to agree. And then there's the National Domestic Abuse Helpline and Victim Support, and then also West Midlands Forced Marriage Helpline. So there is a range of support. I know people were asking in the thing. And the final slide, please. Holly, thank you. If you want to discuss anything further, you can contact me directly. On every domestic abuse notification, you have the phone numbers for myself, Louise Atkinson, and Bev Need, who deal with the domestic abuse on a daily basis. If you've got concerns about a domestic abuse notification that's come through and you need to share anything with us and you don't think it actually meets statutory at that point, but you are worried, please give us a ring, drop us an email, ask us to call you back because we may be in screening, but we're happy to do that. So thank you very much. I will use the break to answer any questions in there, and my apologies to all the other presenters because I was the one that ran over time. So we're going to go for a comfort break now. It's just gone 20 past, so if you could just be back at just after 10:30. Is it 15 minutes, Holly, or sorry?
Just 10 minutes, Lisa.
So just after 10:30, and we'll try. Right, welcome back everybody. I'm hoping you've had a chance to stretch your legs and get yourself a cup of coffee, and we will carry on with our speakers. So I'm going to hand you over to Debbie Brown, who will introduce herself to you. And my apologies that I've nicked a little bit of your time, Debbie, but you'll have to pinch it towards the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. As Lisa said, I'm Debbie Brown. I'm the lead nurse for child mortality for Black Country and West Birmingham CCG. And I'm just going to do a very brief presentation this morning about the ICON programme. Some of you may already know about it. It may be very new to a lot of you. If I could just have the next slide, please, Holly. I'll be touching on these points today about the programme and what it entails. But before that, I just wanted to sort of to say why ICON. As Gillian already mentioned earlier, the national panel report that came out in September, The Myth of Invisible Men and Safeguarding Children Under 1 from Non-Accidental Injury Caused by Male Carers. It is cited in that report that the potential impact of crying can be a precipitating factor for non-accidental injury. And ICON is cited in that report as a valuable tool to engage with and improve parents' reactions to crying. And ICON's terms of reference specifically include the need to have a concerted effort to engage with men at the touch points in the programme. It is a well-researched and evaluated programme, and we are implementing it across the Black Country, the 4 Black Country local authority areas, Sandwell, Dudley, Walsall and Wolverhampton. We were funded by NHS England to implement this. And I think nationally there's about 40 local authority areas now using the programme. Each of the areas in the Black Country has got an implementation group with representation from public health, health visiting, maternity services, general practice, etc. And I will put my email address in the chat so that if anybody's got any questions about the programme, please do contact me afterwards. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Holly? So what is ICON? It's, as I said, it's a programme around having conversations with parents about coping with babies crying. And the ICON message is that infant crying is normal and it will stop, and that babies will start to cry more frequently from around 2 weeks of age. And I'll talk about the normal curve of crying in a moment. The C stands for comfort methods. They can sometimes soothe babies, and it's about giving parents a range of techniques that they can use to comfort a baby. The O stands for it's okay to walk away. If you've checked that the baby is safe and the crying is really getting to you, as a parent or carer, walk away for a few minutes. And the N stands for never ever shake or hurt a baby. We know that shaking a baby can cause long-lasting brain damage or death, and there's information in the programme about contacting general practitioners or NHS 111. If we can have the next slide, please, Holly. So this is just to indicate when the normal curve of infant crying is. It starts to peak anywhere between 2 weeks and 4 months. And we know that some babies can cry for anything up to 5 or 6 hours a day. And if you think of the impact of that on parents, particularly parents that have got other issues or are struggling, that can actually precipitate a shaking episode. And it is about, having those conversations with parents about how they can cope with these periods of crying. If we can have the next slide, please, Holly. So just a little bit about what is abusive head trauma. You may also have heard it described as shaken baby syndrome, but it can cause a catastrophic injury to a child. Brain injuries, bleeding behind the eyes, fractures, bony injuries. And the goal for ICON is to communicate to parents and carers that they can expect a baby to cry, how to prepare for it and how to cope with it. And the aim of the programme is to reduce the incidence of abusive head trauma that is triggered by crying. There's a link later on in the slides, which you will get after today, with a link to the website that's got a load of resources on there that as frontline practitioners you can use with parents. Thank you. So a few more facts about abusive head trauma. It's the most common cause of death or long-term disability in babies. We know that approximately 200 children are unfortunately killed or hurt annually in the UK. But these figures that come from the research we know are an underestimation of the real numbers that are involved. And the next slide. So who shakes and why? The ICON programme has done a lot of evaluation and research, and it's identified that 70% of perpetrators of abusive head trauma are men. And they've described that coping with crying can feel like they're living on a cliff edge. We know that caregivers can lose control and shake. This can occur across all groups of people. And there is a demonstrable relationship between the normal peak of crying and babies that are subjected to abusive head trauma. There's an increase in AHT in the first month of life, with a peak at 6 weeks, and during the second month, and then the incidence decreases from 3 to 5 months onwards. Babies are most likely to be shaken when they are between 2 and 4 months old, and this coincides with the time when babies are crying the most. Next slide, please. So how can we as professionals help parents? We can offer ICON as a way to avoid a situation where frustration can lead to abuse. We can discuss the issues that are raised. We can talk to parents and caregivers about the stresses of coping with a crying baby. We can talk through the key points in the leaflet. And there's also a very short video called I Am Unshakable. It lasts for about 2 to 3 minutes. And there's a link to the video in the slides. So after today, click the link and have a look at the video. It's something that you can use amongst yourselves, but also with parents and carers. Next slide, please, Holly. Thank you. So as I've already said, excessive crying can be associated with parental stress. Often, if people are accessing health services with depression, they will cite excessive infant crying as a reason for that. We know that it can impact on relationships, and for people that have felt like shaking their baby, it gives them feelings of guilt and inadequacy and helplessness, and it's about sort of empowering parents and carers to take control of the situation and be able to do something proactively. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So when you're introducing ICON to a parent or carer, so very simple steps, help them to understand that crying is normal, that all parents can feel like this. Do make a positive effort to engage with males that are in that baby's life, whether those are carers, whether those are dads, whether those are other relatives. Explain that crying is a normal part of a baby's development. Reassure parents and carers that babies are not doing this on purpose. Support them with coping with their own emotions and stresses. ICON have got a coping with crying plan on their website that you can use. Teach parents about soothing and comfort methods, and inform them about sharing the ICON leaflet with anybody else in their family circle or friend circle that might be caring for their baby. We know that some babies are more at risk than others. Research tells us that baby boys are more at risk. We know that babies under 6 months old are more at risk because of the peak of crying. Babies that are born preterm or of a low birth weight can be more at risk. And babies in families who have had previous involvement with children's services are also higher in the statistics. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk you through very quickly some of the touch points in the ICON programme. Any professional can have a conversation with a family with a baby at any point in the first 6 months about ICON, but there are core touch points that we will be implementing across the Black Country, and I'm just going to talk through these with you. So the first touch point is going to be either antenatally or in hospital or at home, dependent on where a mother delivers, following delivery of the baby before they are discharged. And this is often the time when men are present and there's an opportunity to engage with them at that point about the programme. There is a leaflet that can be provided. Each of the 4 areas in the Black Country have had some monies given to them. Some are using them to purchase the leaflets. They can be also downloaded from the website. And there are various touchpoint cards that can be used from the website as well. So the first touch point is following delivery of the baby. Next slide, please. Second core touch point is within the first 10 days following delivery. That may be with a community midwife, it may be with a family support worker, and it's a light touch reminder. Do you remember the message that we had a discussion with you about ICON? Do you remember about what to do if your baby's crying excessively? That's going to be repeated by the health visitor at the primary visit, which is usually done around about 10 to 14 days following birth. Again, it's a light touch reminder and a conversation about comforting techniques. The next core touch point is approximately 3 weeks after delivery, and that can be via text or telephone or face-to-face visit. You know, it doesn't really matter how that touch point is done. It's going to be delivered by the health visiting service locally, and again, it's a light touch reminder about previous conversations and just talking with the parents. Do they have a plan about how they're going to cope if their baby is crying excessively? And then the final core touch point is at the 6 to 8 week check at the GP surgery. We've rolled out training across the Black Country to our GP practices, and a questionnaire is now included in the national toolkit around ICON. So what we're saying really is, in the first 6 months following birth, we would encourage all practitioners to have a discussion about ICON. Do have a look at the website, have a look at the resources, have a look at the discussion ideas that are on there. Reiterate the 4-point ICON message, the I, the C, the O, the N. It's an easy message to remember. And have some proactive discussions with families about how they're going to cope with crying. Have they thought about it? Have they thought about their support network if it's really overwhelming them? Next slide, please. So I've already mentioned ICON resources. There's lots of resources that you will see around locally: leaflets, stickers, fridge magnets. There's the video, and I would encourage you to have a look at that after today. You can also download a coping with crying plan off the website. I've already mentioned the GP questionnaire. And there's also an infographic, the C for Comforting Methods infographic, which you can also download or order as a poster to put up in clinics and waiting rooms, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. That's just an example of some of the resources that you can either download or order. As I say, each of the areas has an implementation group, and if you want to know who is in that group from your local area, do contact me by email after today and I can let you know who that is. And the next slide. And that's just the Comfort Methods poster that can be downloaded and printed off and displayed in sort of public areas, which is quite helpful. And the next one. In Sandwell, we've also funded some bibs that the health visitors will be giving out at the primary visit. And this bib, we've done this before and it was quite successful. It was well evaluated. It was well received by families. It's just a tool that the health visitors can use to generate that discussion about coping with a crying baby. And we're also in the process now of ordering bibs for all the other areas across the Black Country. So there's some parity across the 4 areas. There is also an NSPCC leaflet called Handle with Care, which does cover the messages about coping with a crying baby. And again, that's available on the NSPCC website. That's the link to the video. So when you do get a copy of the presentation after today, do click on that link and it will take you straight through to the I Am Unshakable video, which, as I say, lasts just 2 to 3 minutes. And it is something that you can point parents to watch themselves or look at it with them on their sort of smartphones or tablets. And Icon has got quite a good presence on social media. They tend to use Twitter and Facebook quite regularly. There's usually a national Icon week, and so you will be seeing that locally when that comes up. It's later in the year, and that's an opportunity for organisations to promote the Icon message and to use social media as a way to do that. And the next one. That's just to show you the website link. It's iconcope.org. There's lots of resources on there for both parents and for professionals, and you can also register with Icon as a professional and then have access to the members page. There are loads and loads of resources on there, so please do look at the website and see what might be appropriate for you to use. So that's the end of it. The other thing is that Dudley produced some online learning, an online learning package for Icon, which has now been uploaded to the Sandwell platform. And I think that Holly will be sending that link out to people after today's event, so that if you did want to log in and do the online learning package around Icon and get a certificate for your PDR at the end, then that's available to all practitioners across all organisations. So thank you very much for listening. And as I say, I will put my email address in the chat for anybody that's got any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I think there is one or two questions in the chat. If you could pick those up, that would be great for us. Thank you very much. But and I think people are wanting those links, so those will all be shared. So thank you very much. So I'm now going to hand over to Ruth Pearson, who's going to introduce herself and talk to you about disguise compliance. So over to you, Ruth.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. I'm going to try and I was going to try and share my own PowerPoint, but I'm really sorry. So I'm going to have to ask Holly if you can back me up and do it for me. Thank you very much. Okay, I thought I'd be clever and do it because I've can you do it as a slideshow? Yes, my name's Ruth Pearson. The subtitle I've been given is Think the Unthinkable. And then what do we do? The Think the Unthinkable comes from the Serious Case Review. Hang on, can you put it as a slideshow, or have I done something wrong? It comes from the Serious Case Review for Daniel Pelker. And I think in terms of, I've always said about that one, there were lots we missed. There are lots we perhaps could have known, but I think we couldn't have thought the unthinkable for what was happening to Daniel. Next slide. Are we okay? I'm sorry, Holly. Are we okay?
Sorry, Ruth, bear with me. It's just not loading up properly.
Oh, okay. So I thought I could do it from here. Sorry. Unless I can find it from my... Okay.
Bear with me, Ruth. I'm just trying to reopen it.
Okay. Okay, just a little bit about while we're waiting. I'm sorry about this. So a lot of the stuff I do a lot of training on neglect, so fixing with neglect. I do a lot of training for Sandwell on hidden men, which we've already talked about, and I do training on disguise compliance. So just I was hoping to be as brief as I can and whip through some of these. I'll just leave you as a handout. They're useful references, but you've got some the procedures in terms of what we're looking at. What do we mean? your procedures in terms of when people don't want to work with us. Looking at resistance may be expressed in aggression, open refusal to cooperate, or in missed appointments and other forms of avoidance, or it may be masked by superficial cooperation. That's what we're looking at, isn't it? And the common features, this is a key theme for me, the common feature in all cases are failure to change and refusal or an inability to acknowledge or address the risk to the child's welfare. This comes across through what I'm trying to talk about in terms of we want to see a change for that child, and we sometimes miss the fact that there isn't change, and we need to know why. Okay, next slide, please. Just a little bit to remind ourselves of what we mean. It's an odd phrase, isn't it? Disguised compliance. It means really they're disguising the fact that they're not complying. But Reader and Duncan pulled together again the first kind of piece of work looking at serious case reviews, or Part 8 reviews as they were then, and they identified patterns of closure or flight when families attempted to reduce their contact with the external world by shutting out, regain control and shutting out professionals. We were asking them about their parenting, and they wanted to maintain control of what was happening in their household. So they either stopped keeping appointments, stopped letting us in, or moved. Often when professionals took a more controlling stance, this was diffused by apparent cooperation, the effect of which was to neutralise the professional's authority and return the relationship to closure and previous status quo. All of a sudden, the home conditions improved. All of a sudden, school attendance improved, and we thought they were doing it, and we missed it. Next slide, please. And again, have a thinking about Marion Brand, who does a lot of work on serious case reviews, families who are resistant to change but have short periods of cooperation to seek to draw attention away from the concerns. Or we're looking at non-effective compliance. They're ticking the right boxes, they're saying the right thing, but there's no change. Or partial, ambivalent, or selective cooperation. They can do some things, but they can't do others. Okay, thank you. Next one. And again, Marion Brandon looking at serious case reviews, the key word for us is we were wrong-footed. We got it wrong, and prevented or delayed the understanding of severity of harm and to the child, and cases drifted. We didn't get it, and again, those were looking at children ended up in serious case reviews. Next slide, please. I'll do the little bit. I do a lot of stuff on neglect, and it's really interesting. You've got your new neglect strategy here, really, really important. Ofsted did quite a little bit of work on researching why we don't get neglect right. It's really difficult to get it right. But what they were looking at is parents not engaging in plans when we didn't work it, outcomes for children were not improving, and professionals did not consistently challenge parents, which is what we're talking about, particularly when we've got some sort of a plan, some sort of a schedule of what we want to see for those children. Things weren't getting any better. Outcomes for children were not improving. We didn't challenge parents. Okay, next slide. Thank you. And again, as Michael Jarrett was talking about this morning, lots of issues obviously still to come with the National Serious Case of Child Practice Review, but thinking about those two little lives of Arthur Lavinia Hughes and Star Hobson, big issues of how we got it wrong. People were manipulating us in terms of, oh, he must have got a bruise in the garden. We was never allowed out normally. Or Star Hobson, lots of referrals, and one complaint was closed and the allegation was dismissed as malicious and the workers were fobbed off. I have a big thing about malicious. The meaning of the word malicious means with malice. It could have been, but we've somehow changed it to mean it's not true. We need to listen to what people are saying. Those grandparents, those babysitters, were really concerned, but the couple were the families involved were very, very credible. Okay, next one. Thank you. I won't go through all of this with you, but this is on your West Midlands website, Safeguarding Board website, and it's really useful if you think, are they doing it, aren't they? So really good to sit back and have your supervision, bit of a tick list. Are they doing it? Is this happening? So there's, again, the thing about change. There's no significant change at reviews, despite significant input. We're all doing something, early help, whatever level we're at. There's no change. Failure to keep appointments. Parents are agreeing with professionals, but putting little effort into making changes work. Or there is a change, but that's happened by somebody else doing it. It's the child, it's the grandma, whatever. Next slide, please. And the other three, these three all together, they cause difficulties in the multi-agency communication, or they're doing this, but they're not doing that. They're doing this for me, but we haven't worked out, well, actually, there's other bits. There's bits that they can do, but other bits that they find harder. And also, again, this is in your procedures, they're refocusing attention. We're trying to ask about the care of their child. We're trying to ask about perhaps issues of domestic abuse or whatever. They've detoured us, and they put us through the lodging of complaints or presenting a pattern of crises. This has happened, that's happened, whatever. We've lost sight of the child and what might be happening in there. And constantly, again, in serious case reviews, we need to say the child's report of the situation is in conflict with the report. So what is life like for that child? What are they telling us? Lots of stuff here today about reporting. But those are things where there's plans. Take a step back. Our first worries, our first little niggles, all agencies can be key to picking up worrying signs about the children that could be a hint of what might be really happening behind a facade. Lots of things, particularly there's a lot of people have a big investment in not letting us know what's happening, not letting us know what those children. Next slide, thank you. Okay, let me just see what my next slide would be. Yeah, we can never rely purely on parental self-report. We somehow take it, they've told us this, so it must be true. Serious case review I did, mum's partner had killed the little girl, but previously there'd been a concern about domestic abuse. Police have been out, no further action for all the reasons we know. Because there were children in the house, the duty social worker went out, spent a long time with the couple, wrote down on their case notes, the couple were open and honest about their relationship. They were not at all, okay? But for all sorts of reasons, there's a social worker, she's not going to say anything. He's in the same room, even if it's a different room, a different building. They were very good at it. Okay, you can never say they were open and honest. You can just say what they said. And all the other things parents tell us, oh, I didn't go because the children were ill. That's what they said. Okay, and remember Arthur Labinio Hughes was described as boisterous. That was written down. That's what they said. No, this is what the parents said. It's not necessarily true. And as soon as we start thinking about, oh, this couple are open and honest, we somehow reframe everything they've said. And it's certainly in his interest, in her interest, for us not to know. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Again, these are the things that we can be presented with. He seems happy and playful. It seemed a happy household. Okay, we know now what was going on. You can never, that's all you can say. Again, there's people, we can say, this is what they seemed to be, this is what they said, this is what I looked at. Daniel Pelker was well dressed and there were no concerns about his siblings. I did a paper at a conference a while back, the police officer who dealt with the Daniel Pelker situation, and people were saying, well, the mother was well dressed, and somebody even said her nails were done beautifully. That's all that kind of unconscious bias that we have. She doesn't look like somebody, she doesn't tick the boxes of somebody who would be neglectful of their children. And again, the police officer who went the first visit, the home was clean and tidy and there was a bowl of fruit on the table. Or somebody else had said in another house they were looking at, well, there's a pot of snowdrops on the windowsill. We can be taken in by those sorts of things because we're people and we're busy. Okay, but we come. So what do? Focus on change, particularly if they're on a plan of some sort. Look at change for the child, which has got to be brought about by the parent. And our plans, I do a lot of stuff on plans and our expectations, and telling parents what their expectations is. What are we looking at? So we've got to have a plan based on child's developmental needs and how are the parents going to prioritize their needs. Use clear language, all the stuff that our difficulties in terms of our definition of neglect, in terms of this has got to improve, or this is adequate, or this is appropriate. We've got to be clear with parents what we want to see, being very specific, so that A, they know what they need us to do, and B, we know when they haven't done it. If improved home conditions means different things for us and also within different agencies. Some of the difficulties we have in working with neglect is so-and-so is adequate, might be such is inadequate. So we need to be clear about our expectation. Next slide. Thank you. Focus on the child. We need to think, and parental behaviours may be designed to prevent the professionals gaining a true picture of the child. What's it like being that child? How do we know? Have we seen this child? And link parenting behaviour with parenting capacity. So all the issues about, we know how harmful it is for children to be witnessing and to be aware of domestic abuse, but how is that abuse, particularly if there's issues of coercive control, affecting that parent's ability to meet the needs of the child? You may be working with that parent on parenting or how to get the homework done. Is that supported, or is that affected? How is the money managed? All those sorts of things. And think about a 24-hour day in a child in terms of people who are dependent on drug or alcohol, how they access that, what that impact that has. So do we have a true picture of the lived experience of the child? If not, what or who is preventing that? What do we know? Think about a 24-hour clock. What's it like being that child? Okay, next slide, thank you. Work with all members of the family. Lots of things we were talking about earlier on in terms of neglect or in terms of domestic abuse, and certainly in terms of working with men. I do a lot of, I'll be doing tomorrow in Sandwell, I do a lot of work on working with men, hidden men, invisible men. We either ignore them or we miss the positives, the decent dads. We need to get them involved, particularly early days in their babies, or we miss them, and it could be a risk. Extended family, again, the other things about malicious information. Think about that. The neighbours telling you, it's maybe a referral, it may be something that they know. We're not there. They know what goes on in that house, so they're telling us. And again, thinking about the issues of Arthur Lavinia and Star Hobson. Malicious. We thought it was closed as a malicious. It was malicious based on a dislike of mum's partner, and certainly I think there's concerns about fears of homophobia in that one. We'll have to see. Next slide. Thank you. So what do we look at? How easy is it for a relationship to be fabricated? What are we looking at when we look at that parent with that child? When do we last see that parent or hear that parent say something nice to or that child? How long do we look at? And the police officer at the Daniel Pelker case was saying one of the key bits of evidence for the criminal proceedings was the video taken from the school of what happened when Daniel Pelker's mum picked him up from school. I mean, it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, given what we know that child went home to. And so who's looking, and what's your receptionist saying? What are we looking at in terms of that contradicts what they're telling us in terms of how they're caring for their child? Okay, next slide, please. You do feel like Chris Whitty, don't you? So thinking about multi-agency working, your little piece of information. We've talked about it a lot, haven't we? The importance of multi-agency working, and a parent should know we talk to each other. Okay, and a chronology, really important, building up that pattern. Are they doing what they said? Have they kept this meeting? Are they saying it, or are they only just doing it now and again? Really important in terms of getting our pattern of this is actually, it's a long-term pattern of they're not doing it, or there are things that we're not seeing. Okay, next one, thank you. So thinking about, are we the balance between using strengths-based working, or are we over optimistic? So remember what evidence-based tells us. Remember, for example, if you're working with somebody who there is long-term issues, powerful issues of domestic abuse, maybe issues of control, and all of a sudden they said, no, he's gone, I've got rid of him. It's ended, he doesn't come around anymore. Just ask yourself the question, how likely is that? What we know about that, how likely is that? Because that's, and often that's the most dangerous time, as we know. And again, think about, are they not cooperating with us? Does that raise my concerns or lower my concerns? Okay, next slide. So this is we have to just, you can just bung these in, pop these in, Holly, just put the bullet points in for me. If we can do that, yeah. So all the things, everybody lies, everybody tells lies. I was stuck in traffic. Think about Father Christmas, and oh yes, you look lovely in that dress. It was a delicious meal. The families we work with have had lots of things that it's much more important to lie about. Okay, yeah. No, I didn't spill that drink. Or the partner with a violent or jealous partner. No, I wasn't talking to your friend. Lots of things that families will. We're a piece of cake to lie to, in terms of what people have to do in their daily lives to keep themselves safe, in terms of, like the couple, the woman who was saying yes, they were open and honest about their relationship. So we need to think about how we challenge and what we say. Okay, next slide. I do lots of stuff on lying. Why do we believe parents? Why are they good at it? Why do we believe parents? They're very good at it, and most of us do, and we get away with it. I do an exercise saying, think of something you were less than honest about. How did you get away with it? The other thing is, sometimes, do we want to believe that all is well? You know, like if you've had your hair done and you're not quite sure what you like it, you want somebody to say, yes, it's lovely. If we're working with this family and we've worked hard with them, or we want to support them, do we actually examine ourselves and say, actually, I want it to be okay, or maybe don't want to hear this? You know, there's some little things. Lots of stuff about how we question. So they know what questions we're going to ask, and they can prepare the answers. They are very good actors. Okay, you've got somebody coming to see you. There's an incident of domestic abuse. You know a social worker is going to come and see you. You're going to prepare. You're going to get the script right. Okay, and people have been doing it for ages, and they're very good at it. Okay, so and the other thing is, people prefer to conceal than to actually lie. So they're not going to tell us. If we don't ask the question, they're much happier not to tell us. Okay, it's like you go shopping and you put the expensive boots in the wardrobe. Okay, say nothing. Okay, so what do we do? Triennial review of serious case reviews talks about professional authority. This is what we have. Whatever job we do, we have that authority. Involves both confidence and competence. Effective working with parents requires professional curiosity. We've already mentioned that, haven't we? And challenge, without which analysis may lack rigor and depth. We're just looking at what we see, unless we've done that challenge, unless we've done that thinking. And also, our warning here is prioritizing keeping families together must be tempered by remaining alert to situations where this might not be in the best interests. We want to be supportive, but there may be situations where we have to say different. Next slide, thank you. So we challenge, we use authoritative and what Harry Ferguson calls a negotiated child protection practice. We have that authority. What's the not negotiable? I have to pass this on. I have to ask you these questions. We have to see for this child, what's the best way of doing it? And we need assertiveness and persistence. It's not passive, and it's not aggressive or confrontational style. People sometimes mistake assertiveness for aggression or confrontation. People aren't going to work with us. We're not going to work with them, particularly if we're trying to work with all members of the family. And you can rehearse the phrase for a difficult conversation. What am I going to say? I'm not sure that they were telling me the truth. Okay, next slide. Thank you. We've had that phrase, the respectful uncertainty. We have the eyes wide open. What are we not seeing? What's the unknown unknowns? Okay, safe uncertainty and authoritative doubt need to be a state of mind. It's not a weakness. This is the way we always work. We make it clear to the family. We might be asking you some difficult questions. Okay, we're not, because it might seem suspicious to you, but this is how we work. This is what we're going to have to ask you, because that's our job. Yeah. Next slide. Thank you. So if somebody's saying something to you that you don't think adds up, listen. Take some time to think. Ask them to repeat back the detail that you're not sure about. Give a bit more detail. So tell me about that. So tell me more. Or repeat back the statement or paraphrase. You may have something you said. Or I just need to think about what you've said. I've got a problem in that. Or it doesn't fit with, again, particularly if it doesn't fit with what the school's telling me, what the children don't seem to be saying that. Or that's one possible answer. So again, think about some of those things. Rehearse some of those questions that you might ask if you've got a niggling feeling that somebody's not telling you the truth. Okay, so you will be deterred. You will be deterred if you're getting close to the question, you're getting close to a difficult issue. Somebody will deter you. They'll put you off. They'll distract you. Oh, I'm too busy at the moment. Or, oh, my problem is this. It's the school. It's the benefits. Or you're commissioned for taking kids off parents, or you've upset me so much. Lots of people are very good at crying, and they've got a lot to cry about. So how we manage those? Next slide. Okay, so I'm too busy. Just say I need just a couple of minutes, and then to to ask. It may be that detour is a false one anyway, but we don't know about that. But keep it brief and arrange another specific time. I just need to ask you before you get off. I just need to say I do need to talk to you about this, or the distracting. If it's the benefits, if it's a school, just take a note. Well, okay, we'll see if we can sort that out later. Can I bring you back to? Otherwise, you'll have been sat for 20 minutes talking about something that they want you to talk about, but you don't. So again, the denying or the joking, all these just ignore that, just briefly. And if you're clear about what you're asking them, if you're clear about why we're wanting them, we've come back to that point easily. Or the poor me, you know, people, the tears, whatever. Don't feel guilty. And say it is difficult. I'm asking you some difficult questions. Return to the point and arrange another time. So thinking about the questions we ask, if we ask closed, hopefully a lot of people will be aware of this. Closed questions, yes or no. Have you been drinking? Is he violent? All those sorts of things. We know that. It's an easy one. The open, so the general. Think about the questions. Tell me more about that, or help me understand what's this. Or when you say things are fine, again, you ask people, how are things? Fine. How would you describe that? And you can also say, think what we're asking you to do is difficult. You must have had some wobbles. Tell me about those. Okay. Or the follow-up question. Say, oh, okay, then. So tell me a little bit more about that. Because again, if we're busy, they're much more happy for us to shut it down. Is there something you think I should know that you've not told me? So it's much easier if we say, if we're not going to ask them, they're not going to tell us. So again, I know what we're asking you to do is a bit difficult. Tell me a time when, you know, things haven't gone quite so well. So how likely was the answer? How much likely? How convincing were they? It could be that they were fine. You've been completely, they were absolutely right. You've still got a niggle. You still doesn't add up. So then what do I do now? Next slide. Thank you. So how we make decisions on this, and I think the importance of our feeling and our hypothesis, our gut feeling, our gut reaction. You may have a feeling this doesn't add up to me. It doesn't add up. I'm going to have to ask some more questions. I'm going to have to talk to other people. Don't ignore your gut feeling. You're making an assessment. You just haven't just thought about why is it this just doesn't add up. And again, just talking to somebody else made that, well, it doesn't add up at all. But again, your gut feeling may be, oh, they're fine, they're doing really well, because they're just very good actors. So why are we worried? Why am I worried about this child? And sometimes more importantly, why am I not worried? What information are we basing this on? Why am I worried? Remember, and I think this is like what we call confirmation bias. The gut decides, then the brain justifies, particularly if they're smiling at you, they like you, you know, you've got nice nails and all the rest of it. We want it to be okay. So think about our unconscious bias. Think about that they're smiling, or the home conditions are nice. Remember the snowdrops on the windowsill, or they don't look like they're a neglectful parent. You know, remember somebody sort of commented on the fingernails. Next slide, thank you. So think about our view of any family as a hypothesis, just a suggestion. It's just a working way of thinking. We need to test that continually. Am I right? Are we still on the right track? And you need your reflective space to think, what am I being told? What sense do I make of this? What else am I basing my view on? Okay, who else might have information? What else might I need? Again, all the things people we've talked about, multi-agency, family, children. Do I still think the same thing? Does this change? And I think I really think they feel strongly about it. It's not a weakness to change your mind. For some people, it says, well, I'm going to stick to their guns, whatever. We might have got it wrong. We might have been completely bamboozled because they're very good at it. Okay, next slide. So thinking about, you need your reflective space to discuss the meaning of all the information, the chronology, the observation, what the child is saying, your gut reaction. Am I being influenced by my emotion or fear or my individual bias? And think about, again, in your multi-agency setting, use your assertiveness skills to challenge others' opinions. You might be the one who's got it right. Okay, thank you. And I think always remember the impact of how we feel on how we think and what we do. Are we being influenced by somebody? Do we want to be said? Or what is our feeling about this? I'm feeling this. Take it into your thinking. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Holly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I appreciate you sort of trying to catch some time up there.
Okay.
If you've got any questions for Ruth, I'm sure she'll be around for a little while just so she can answer those queries for you if there is anything. And Lucy's popped the training into that in there. So I'm going to hand over to Eleanor Stobart now, who's going to talk to you about the Domestic Homicide Review 10. So over to you, Eleanor.
Hi, thank you for that. Yes, my name's Eleanor Stobart, and I've been asked to come talk to you today about the case of Marie, known locally as the HR10. It's now been published, and I think it's available online. To do that, I'm going to give a brief description of Marie's experience and talk about a couple of the findings from the review. So Marie and her abuser were known by 17 agencies around Sandwell.
Sorry, Eleanor, we can't hear you very well. You're really breaking off.
All right. Shall I turn my camera off? Do you think that'll help?
Oh, that sounds much clearer.
All right, I'll turn my camera off and do that. Thank you. So Marie was known to 17 agencies around Sandwell and the surrounding area. And really, she first comes into view in February 2014, when her mother contacted the police because there were concerns that Marie was being held against her will. In the police report, when the police went round, they described her as sat trembling on the sofa, looking like a scolded child. She was described as timid and nervous, and when the perpetrator spoke, she visibly shook. And if he raised his voice, she flinched. He was described as agitated and belligerent. They were separated, and Marie disclosed a catalogue of abuse, and he was arrested and charged on suspicion of rape, unlawful imprisonment, and threats to kill. He was remanded into custody to await trial in August 2014. Because she was a high-risk victim, her case went to Marek, and between the police investigation and the domestic homicide review, it was revealed that for 2.5 years, he had threatened to kill her should she leave him. And she absolutely believed him. He said he'd cut her up and put her in the freezer. He also said if she left him, he would petrol bomb her family. So she effectively became imprisoned. He raped her. He starved her to 5.5 stone. There were stories that he would get a chicken takeaway and then throw the bones at her when he'd finished. He cut up her clothes and made her wear his clothes. And indeed, that was a case when he was arrested. She was wearing his clothes. Sometimes he'd throw her shoes away and make her walk home barefoot. On other occasions, she was made, if he'd run out of tobacco, to go and pick up tab ends from the street, and he'd take away her shoes and watch her out of the window to make sure she didn't run away. She wasn't allowed to wear makeup. He controlled every aspect of her life, including her money, and her bank card was on him when he was arrested. He was a drug dealer, and he tested out his new batches of drugs on her. On one occasion, he phoned an ambulance and said, she's taken 2 bags of heroin and she's fitting and stopped breathing. He gave her some naloxone to reverse it, but escorted her to hospital and no one recorded his name. Because she was high risk, and actually at the time of his arrest, she was 2 weeks pregnant, a referral was made to social care. The outcome was that because she was only 2 weeks pregnant, she needed to be monitored by the midwife, and another referral could be made when she was deemed viable for statutory involvement, which was at 16 weeks. So that would take her up to mid-June. During that period between his arrest and the following referral, the perpetrator contacted her from prison and she went to see him twice. And the outcome was she retracted her statement, but she did make a victim impact statement for court. That is actually available if you look online at the full report, the full victim impact statements there. But I'm just going to read out a paragraph from it because I think her victim statement really shows who she was and where she wanted to be and where she wanted to go in life. And the final paragraph says, about 5 weeks ago, I sent him a note simply saying we're done. By that note, I meant I want nothing more to do with him, and I don't want to be in a relationship with him. I did not receive a reply, and I didn't want one. I don't want to read, hear, or see anything from him again. I fear that he would not give up trying to find me, and it frightens me to think what would happen if he did. I want nothing more to do with him. So during the 3.5 months between his arrest and her referral to social care, she used her time really well. She put on 3 stone. She didn't take drugs. She stopped using any alcohol or tobacco, and she attended every appointment and did everything asked of her. So at the beginning of July 2014, there was an initial child protection conference, and her unborn baby was made subject of a child protection plan under the category of neglect. Then, as planned, in mid-August, the perpetrator went to trial and he was convicted of the lesser offence of putting a person in fear of violence. He was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment, and that was suspended for 2 years. But part of it, he was ordered to attend a Building Better Relationships course, and he was to be monitored by the National Probation Service for 24 months. But the court didn't put in place a restraining order. That was because a member of his family contacted Marie the day before and said, you need to get down to court and say you don't want a restraining order. And that she did. 2 days later, there was another core group meeting, and Marie was informed by her social worker that if she had any contact with the perpetrator, care proceedings would be initiated. Bearing in mind that she's already told everybody that he's going to come and find her. A week after his release, Marie was evicted with immediate notice to quit from a refuge, and that wasn't in the Sandwell area. She was evicted on the hearsay of another resident that she allegedly had a Stanley knife and she was a threat to other residents and staff. She was given no right to appeal. She was 34 weeks pregnant. After she'd left immediately, 2 refuge workers packed up the things in her room and documented them all, and a knife was never found.